Chapter 13. Israel. Have you thought about that idea I brought up about the mall? True to his word, Israel had brought up the subject with Chance shortly after his date with Tiffany. Chance nodded. Yeah, I've spoken to a few of the local businesses. There are some interested in moving or expanding to the mall if we can get traffic there. So the next step is to reach out to some larger businesses, some franchises, and see if we can get some interested. Let me know how I can help. This means a lot to Tiffany. Speaking of Tiffany, are you going to ask her to the end of summer bash? Chance asked, as he lifted his cup to take a sip. They were sitting in the resort dining room because Israel had refused to sit in the coffee bar. Chance had lifted an eyebrow when Israel put his foot down, but he'd agreed, knowing Israel would explain himself when he was ready. Yeah, I'm hoping to. She was acting a little weird on our last date, though, and she missed church yesterday. That had been the worst part for Israel. After Friday night, he'd been confused. He didn't know if her cool behavior was due to the pain, or Sophia, or both. Then he'd gotten her apology text and thought everything would be okay. But he'd waited all Saturday for a call from her. A call that never came. He'd been about to call her when a text had arrived stating she was still feeling sick and wouldn't be at church. He'd offered to come over and help her, but she'd declined, leaving Israel wondering yet again if he'd done something to upset her. Little lines erupted on Chance's forehead as it scrunched together. What do you mean weird? Man, I wish I knew. When I picked her up Friday night, she kept grimacing in pain. Then we ran into Sophia at the restaurant, and even though I told her nothing was going on, she asked me to take her home early. We didn't even eat dinner before the date ended. Chance chuckled and glanced back toward the coffee bar. Is that why you didn't want to sit in the bar? Israel nodded. Sophia is nice, but she's flirty. I don't want to give Tiffany the wrong idea, especially with what's going on. The concern returned to Chance's face. What is going on? Did she tell you what the pain was about? No, she just told me she was still not feeling well and would miss church. Is she at work today? Chance shrugged. I think so. I don't remember Mary Beth saying she needed coverage for her. Look, I'm sure it's nothing. It was probably one of those 24-hour things that hit you hard, and then after a good sleep it's gone. Maybe it was just something she ate. Or maybe it was that time of the month. Dude. Israel fixed a pointed stare at his friend. Chance held up his hands in surrender. Hey, I'm not a woman. I just know cramps are a real thing. While that was more information than Israel wanted to think about, it did ease his anxiety a little. All of those could be possibilities. And she had apologized both the night of the failed date and the next day about church. He probably was overthinking things. You're right. I'll ask her tonight. Are you and Mary Beth going? We're kind of in charge of the thing, so we have to be there. Thankfully, a few of the girls who work with Tiffany were free to work that night. I'm sure we won't be the only couple wanting to attend who has a kid. Speaking of which, did you talk to Tiffany about your wish list for your own basketball team? Israel laughed at the memory. Before the accident on the last deployment he and Chance had been on, they'd been discussing lost loves and future romances. Israel had jokingly stated that since he was so terrible at basketball, he hoped to have enough kids to make up his own team so they could all improve together. Well, I didn't tell her that, but we did talk about kids. She wants a big family too, so I don't think I'm going to scare her away with that. Chance leaned back in his chair. Wow, you've already had the kids talk? How serious is this? Israel bit the inside of his lip. He'd probably already said too much, especially since he had no idea where Tiffany stood on their future yet. They hadn't officially said they loved each other, though it had almost slipped out of Israel's mouth more than once. I'm not sure yet, but I could see it getting there quickly. Right on, man. I'm so happy for you. Chance's smile was wide and genuine, and Israel warmed, knowing that Chance was a man of his words and meant what he said. With a glance at his watch, Chance pushed back and stood. "I'd love to chat more, but I have a meeting in 10 minutes, and my office manager gets testy if I'm late." "Your office manager or your wife?" Israel asked with a laugh, following suit. "She's just my manager here, though I have to tell you that working with your wife has its perks," Chance said with a wink. "But hey, maybe you'll find that out for yourself soon." Israel shook his head and followed his friend to the entrance. As the childcare room was on his way to his office, Israel decided to stop in and ask Tiffany to the bash before he lost his nerve. Though they'd been dating for the last month, her behavior over the weekend had stirred up a feeling of insecurity that sent his heart thumping in his chest. The top half of the child room door was open when he arrived, allowing him to locate Tiffany in one corner, cleaning up toys, while another staff member read a story to the kids in the opposite corner. He knocked lightly on the frame, not wanting to just barge in, but hoping to get Tiffany's attention without interrupting the kids. She looked up, and he saw the recognition in her eyes, but there was no smile today. In fact, her whole countenance looked sad as she held up a finger to let him know it would be a minute, and then finished her task. He stepped to the side of the door, out of the view of the kids inside, and waited, wondering what had happened to wipe the smile from her face that generally resided there. "Hey, Israel, what can I do for you?" Even her voice was soft and slightly forlorn as she posed the question upon reaching him. "Are you okay? You seem like something's wrong." She bit the bottom of her lip, something he'd never seen her do, and sighed. "It's just been a long weekend of thinking and little sleep." "Oh." He wanted to ask if there was more he could do for her, but there was an air about her that said she just wanted to get back to work. "Well, I won't keep you, but I stopped by to see if you would accompany me to the bash Friday night." He'd dropped his eyes to the floor as he posed the question, his nerves taking over, but he lifted them to her face when he finished, hoping to see her familiar smile, the light in her eyes, something positive. Instead, though he wouldn't have thought it possible, she looked even sadder than before. He could swear tears glistened in her eyes. I wish I could say yes, Israel, but I can't. In fact, I don't think we should see each other any longer." She bit down on her lip again, causing it to turn red, and leading Israel to wonder if she'd bit it hard enough to make it bleed. "What? Why? Does this have anything to do with Friday night?" Israel had thought they'd cleared everything up with their texts. He had expected there might be a little unease between them, but he certainly hadn't expected this. "It's just not a good time in my life right now. I'm sorry." Before Israel could say anything further, she turned and disappeared into the childcare room again. He stood outside, blinking for a moment as he wondered what had just happened. With a heavy heart and a mind fuzzy with confusion, Israel headed back to the maintenance office to throw himself back into work. Head down and eyes on the floor, he did not notice the woman coming his direction until he collided with her. "I'm so sorry," he said, his words fading as he lifted his eyes to find himself staring at Sophia. Of all the luck. "No, I'm sorry. I should have been paying closer attention." Her eyes raked over his face, and then her hand was on his arm. "Are you okay, Israel?" He wasn't, but did he really want to share that with Sophia? "Come on, I know you already had a coffee, but you look like you could use another and a friend right now. Let me do that for you." He thought about saying no. After all, he still suspected Sophia had feelings for him. But the look on her face right now seemed sincere, and maybe talking would help. He shrugged. "Okay, sure."